The voice of the universe was never silent. You've just been taught to hear everything else louder. In a world that worships noise, this audiobook will teach you to listen beneath it, to the whisper that never stopped speaking. When the Universe Whisper. Introduction. Some truths do not shout. They do not argue, advertise, or demand your agreement. They simply are, quiet, eternal, waiting. But to hear them, something in you must go still. Jesus didn't say, "He who has ears, listen to what makes sense." He said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." This was not about sound. It was about soul resonance. Because there is a kind of hearing that goes beyond the physical ear. A knowing that doesn't come from books or opinions. It's the recognition that rises in silence, in awe, in stillness, when the noise of the world finally breaks, and something holy breaks through. This audiobook is not about convincing you of anything. It's about tuning you to the voice you were born remembering and taught to forget. The voice that doesn't beg you to believe, but invites you to return. Not to a doctrine, not to a ritual, but to the frequency of truth. The kind you don't analyze, the kind you just know. In these pages, you'll learn to hear what silence is actually saying. Distinguish the voice of truth from the voice of fear. Stop outsourcing your knowing to noise and reclaim the compass within. Because the real miracle is not that the divine speaks. It's that you were always able to hear. You've just forgotten how to listen. This is your remembering. Chapter 1. The Noise of the World. Why most never hear. The sacred doesn't shout, but the world does. It screams in notifications and obligations. It chants in headlines and hashtags. It roars in opinion, performance, and distraction. We live in a society addicted to sound, not just audio, but attention. We are taught to equate noise with importance. The louder the voice, the more valid the message. The more repeated a thought, the more real it must be. In this chaos, the still, small voice, the one that could lead you home, gets drowned in decibels of fear, entertainment, and urgency. You've probably heard the phrase, "The truth will set you free." But what if the truth first needs to get your attention? And that's the problem. Most people never hear it, not because it's not speaking, but because something else is always speaking louder. Why the inner voice is so easy to miss. The voice of truth is not dramatic. It doesn't force itself into your schedule or beg you to listen. It arrives gently, often when you're not trying, not striving, not chasing. It shows up in the gap between thoughts, in the pause between reactions, in the quiet after surrender. But these sacred gaps are becoming rare. We fill them with scrolling, multitasking, analyzing. We check our phones the moment we feel the discomfort of stillness. We're conditioned to fear silence, to interpret it as emptiness, boredom, or lack of productivity. But silence is not absence. It is presence without interference. And that's why most never hear what really matters. Because they have not learned how to stop listening to what doesn't. Noise has a frequency, and so does truth. Here's something most people don't realize. Noise is not neutral. It carries energy. And that energy often operates on the frequency of fear, urgency, scarcity, or ego. The more noise you absorb, the more your nervous system calibrates to it. You begin to expect truth to sound like anxiety. You begin to trust what's loud, what's popular, what's repeated. But truth doesn't compete for your trust. It simply waits for your clarity. You won't find it in the algorithm of your feed or the barrage of self-help jargon. You won't find it in the voice trying to be right or in the anxious race for answers. You'll find it where noise cannot enter, in the sanctuary within. The difference between noise and sound. This may seem subtle, but it's everything. Noise is sound without purpose. Sound is vibration with intention. The world is filled with noise, but the divine speaks in sound. The sound of your own breath. The rustle of trees when you finally paused long enough to hear them. The voice in you that says, "This isn't right," long before your brain can justify why. Most of us aren't listening for that kind of sound. We're too busy chasing certainty. And certainty is the child of ego. Ego wants proof, volume, applause. But the soul wants resonance. Resonance is when something sounds so deeply true that it doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't even need to be understood logically. It just is. Jesus meant this when he said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." He wasn't talking about ears made of flesh. He was talking about the ear of the soul, the part of you that recognizes truth, not by volume, but by vibration. Why truth often sounds like doubt at first. Here's the irony. Truth feels like disruption when you've been living in noise. It feels unfamiliar, and sometimes even wrong. That's because noise is predictable. It tells you what you want to hear. It confirms your bias. It lets you keep your distractions. But truth, authentic, unfiltered, divine truth, rearranges you. It doesn't let you stay numb. It stirs, it convicts, and then it calms. Not the calm of avoidance, the calm of remembrance. When you first hear it, it may not feel like comfort. It may feel like dissonance, like discomfort, like a quiet no, in the face of everything your ego thought was a yes. But that discomfort is holy. It's the beginning of tuning your ear to something higher than habit. The discipline of tuning out. Before you can tune in, you must learn to tune out. This is spiritual discipline, not the kind that shames or restricts, but the kind that clears space. Turn off the noise. Not just the literal sounds, but the psychic noise of needing to know everything, the mental static of endless comparison, the background hum of not enough yet. You don't need more volume. You need more quiet. You don't need more opinions. You need your own presence. The soul doesn't need a megaphone. It just needs room. How this chapter prepares you for what's next. In the introduction, we said this journey is not about convincing you of something new, but about helping you remember what is already inside you. But remembering requires listening, and listening requires quiet. This chapter was about seeing clearly why most never hear the truth, not because it's hidden, but because it's subtle. And subtle things require reverence. In Chapter 2, we'll go deeper. we'll explore how to recognize Spirit's true frequency when it speaks, and how to trust it, even when it contradicts what the world rewards. Because once you begin tuning in, the question becomes, can you stay loyal to what you hear, even when no one else can hear it too? Let's listen more deeply, not just to hear, but to remember. The whisper is waiting. Chapter 2. Tuning in, the frequency of Spirit. In the previous chapter, we dismantled the myth that truth must be loud to be real. We uncovered how the world worships noise. And in doing so, most miss the one voice that matters. But once the noise is cleared, what happens next? You begin to tune in. Not in the way a radio dials for static-free music, but in the way a soul remembers the exact pitch of home, the vibration of spirit, not as sound, but as sensing, not as opinion, but as alignment. The divine doesn't need volume to be heard. It speaks on a different frequency entirely, one only discernible when your being is quiet enough to match it. This chapter is about that tuning, the invisible click where awareness meets divinity, where guidance emerges not from thought, but from resonance. The frequency is always broadcasting. The voice of Spirit isn't distant. It isn't far. It isn't waiting to be summoned by performance or perfection. It is already speaking, right now. But it speaks on its own terms, at its own frequency. And that frequency is subtle, clean, uncluttered. If your inner world is tuned to fear, the signal of Spirit sounds too faint. If your attention is glued to anxiety, the guidance of the soul feels confusing or absent. But if you've cleared even a little of the static and made even a little room for stillness, you'll begin to notice it. Not a voice with words, necessarily, but a nudge, a peace, a sense of yes, with no logical evidence attached. Recognizing the signature of Spirit. So, how do you know it's the voice of Spirit and not your ego playing dress up? The answer lies in the feeling signature. The ego speaks in urgency, scarcity, and justification. Spirit speaks in clarity, stillness, and timelessness. The ego pressures you to act quickly. Spirit invites you to move from certainty, not rush. The ego needs to explain itself. Spirit simply is. And here's the miracle. Once you begin to feel this difference, you'll wonder how you ever confuse the two. Spirit never speaks in panic. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg for attention. It gently informs your being, like the warmth of sunlight. Steady, unseen, but undeniable. Neville Goddard often said, "Feeling is the secret." He wasn't talking about fleeting emotions. He was referring to the felt truth, the inner resonance that confirms something long before external proof arrives. This is tuning in, matching your inner state to the vibration of what already is, not what you're trying to force into being. You cannot hear what you don't match. This may be hard to accept at first, but it's a spiritual law. You don't hear based on how hard you listen. You hear based on how deeply you align. Think of it this way. If a song is playing at 432 Hz, but your inner frequency is cluttered at 900 different wavelengths of worry, you won't catch the melody. Not because the song isn't playing, but because you're not a match to receive it. This is why prayer, silence, and meditation are not spiritual accessories. They are frequency attuners. And this is also why spirit often waits, not because it withholds, but because it refuses to distort itself to match noise. You must rise into its stillness, not drag it into your chaos. The divine is not elusive. It is uncompromisingly clear. But clarity cannot speak where confusion is idolized. The paradox of quiet guidance. Many people say, if God wants to guide me, why doesn't he just speak louder? But louder is not the language of the sacred. Clarity is. And clarity doesn't arrive through volume. It arrives through removal, the softening of ego, the surrender of overthinking, the choosing of peace over panic. Often, Spirit's voice will say something simple. Wait. Rest. You already know. This isn't for you. You're not late. It doesn't offer paragraphs. It offers direction. It's not always what you want to hear, but it's always what you need. And if you're tuned in, if you're calm enough to feel the click of alignment, you'll begin to trust it even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. Because when Spirit speaks, it speaks to you. Not to your doubt, not to your social media, not to your reputation, to you, the eternal you. Why it gets easier over time. You don't need to master this tuning overnight. Like building muscle, your spiritual hearing strengthens with use. Every time you choose peace over panic, you tune closer. Every time you pause before reacting, you create space. Every time you follow the soft voice, even when it contradicts the loud one, you confirm your frequency. And that is the journey, not to earn divine guidance, but to recognize it. Chapter 1 taught us that the world is loud and deceptive. This chapter revealed that Spirit is subtle but consistent, and that you already have what it takes to match its frequency. So now, the question becomes, what happens when your heart begins to recognize truth, but your mind still wants proof? That's where we're headed next. In Chapter 3, the inner ear, hearing with the heart, not the mind, we'll explore why divine knowing rarely satisfies logic, but always satisfies the soul. The signal is already there. All that's left is to trust what you're hearing. Chapter 3, the inner ear, hearing with the heart, not the mind. You've cleared the noise. You've tuned in. Now comes the moment of truth. Can you trust what you hear, even when it doesn't make logical sense? Because spiritual hearing doesn't come through the mind. It comes through the heart. And here's the paradox. The heart understands what the mind cannot explain. The heart hears what logic cannot validate. The deeper you go into this journey, the more you'll realize the mind wants answers, but the heart wants alignment. Why the mind doesn't trust the whisper. The mind is a tool, a brilliant, sharp, adaptive tool. But it was never meant to lead your soul. The mind looks for patterns. It needs reason, evidence, and consistency. It is built for survival, not surrender. It feels safer in analysis than in presence. And so when Spirit speaks softly, without proof, without steps or guarantees, the mind panics. Is that really guidance? What if I'm making it up? But what if I'm wrong? Sound familiar? This is not failure. It's just friction. The rub between the known and the felt. Between the language of intellect and the language of intuition. The key is not to silence the mind, but to reposition it. Let the heart hear first. Let the mind serve the knowing that comes after. The inner ear is the heart. Scripture says, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Not the resume, not the credentials, not the polished logic. The heart. Why? Because the heart is where resonance lives, and resonance is how spirit communicates. When something is true, your heart knows it. Not because it makes perfect sense, but because it feels like home. Florence Scovel Shinn once said, "Intuition is a spiritual faculty and does not explain, but simply points the way." She didn't say it convinced you. She said it points, like a compass, like a whisper. The heart doesn't debate, it directs. Why spiritual guidance often defies logic? Let's be honest. It's unsettling when guidance doesn't come with a map. You sense you're supposed to leave a job, but it doesn't make financial sense. You feel called to move to a city, but no opportunities are lined up. You hear a clear, wait, but everything around you says, hurry. So you doubt. You run the numbers. You ask 10 people. You make pro-con lists. But the whisper doesn't change. It lingers, gently but firmly. Because spirit doesn't shout to out-argue your brain. It waits for you to feel it's still there, after the fear has worn itself out. The mind seeks safety. The heart seeks truth. And the voice of the divine always sides with truth, even if it looks foolish at first. The piece that doesn't make sense. You'll know you've heard true guidance, not because everything clicks on the outside, but because something settles on the inside. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from outcomes. It comes from alignment. It's a deep exhale, a quiet okayness, a nonverbal yes. The world might say it's risky. Your friends might think it's irresponsible. Even your mind might still be buzzing with counter-arguments. But your heart is clear. That's the signature of spirit. Neville Goddard spoke of feeling the wish fulfilled. But that feeling is not imagination alone. It's embodied peace. It's knowing in your bones that something is already done, even if nothing around you reflects it yet. That's the heart hearing what the mind can't translate. Bringing the mind into service. Let's be clear, this is not about rejecting the mind. It's about reordering the hierarchy. Your mind is a servant. Your heart is the throne. When you lead from the heart, the mind can organize, plan, and build in service of something holy. But when the mind leads, it will sabotage anything it cannot predict or control. Tuning in to spirit's frequency means listening with your entire being, not just your intellect. You begin to recognize the inner ear, the one that hears beneath the chatter, beyond the narrative, into the felt knowing of truth. This chapter as a bridge. In Chapter 1, we revealed the deafening effect of worldly noise. In Chapter 2, we began tuning in to the whisper of spirit. Now, in this chapter, you've been introduced to the mechanism of real hearing. Not the brain, not the belief, but the heart. The place where truth lands without explanation. And this prepares you for something deeper. Because if your heart hears the truth, then the next question is, do you trust what you hear enough to act on it, even when nothing around you agrees? In Chapter 4, we'll explore why inner guidance often costs you comfort, reputation, and certainty, and why it's always worth it. But for now, remember this. You don't need more clarity. You need more courage to follow what your heart already knows. The voice is unmistakable. The only question is whether you'll trust what you hear. Chapter 4. The Risk of Obedience. When truth disrupts the familiar. By now, the voice is no longer the issue. You've started to feel it. You've begun to hear it, not in the noise of the world or the chatter of your mind, but in the still and sacred clarity of your heart. And yet, something in you hesitates, not because you don't know what to do, but because you do, and it terrifies you. Welcome to the edge of obedience. This chapter isn't about tuning in. It's about what happens after. When spirit whispers something simple but seismic, and you realize that truly following it will mean letting go of everything safe, familiar, and expected. Obedience sounds holy in theory, but in practice, it feels like holy disruption, and that's precisely how it's meant to feel. Obedience is not submission, it's alignment. Let's get one thing straight. Obedience in this context is not about bowing to some external authority. It's not fear-based compliance. It's not a spiritual performance. It's alignment. A sacred yes to the truth you already heard in your heart. To obey the voice within is to honor the frequency you've finally tuned into. It means acting in resonance with the whisper, even when your world hasn't caught up, even when people don't understand, even when your mind is still bargaining for a safer option. In Chapter 3, we explored how the heart hears what the mind cannot explain. Now, we explore the consequences of listening to that heart. You will be asked to leave something behind, and that leaving is the test. The cost of alignment. You may be guided to walk away from a relationship that no longer serves your soul. You may be called to say no to an opportunity everyone else would kill for. You may feel urged to start something new, without a roadmap, without applause, without guarantees. And in that moment, everything inside of you will scream for compromise. Your mind will say, "Let's wait until it's clearer." Your ego will say, "Let's keep the peace. Don't rock the boat." Your fear will say, "What if you're wrong?" But your heart knows. And obedience is when you choose to act from that knowing, even when it threatens everything that used to make you feel safe. Spiritual whispers often sound like personal upheaval. Here's what no one tells you. Divine guidance is rarely convenient. When the voice says go, it doesn't mean the timing will feel perfect. When the whisper says stay, it doesn't mean you won't feel restless. When the call says trust, it doesn't mean you'll have proof. In fact, the truer the guidance, the more disruptive it tends to be. Why? Because truth, by nature, rearranges illusion. It cannot coexist with half-living, half-truths, or half-heartedness. So when you begin to hear clearly, don't be surprised when things fall apart. Not because something's wrong, but because you're being realigned. Examples in Scripture and Spirit. The Bible is filled with examples of inconvenient obedience. Abraham left his homeland on nothing but a promise. Moses spoke to Pharaoh with only a staff and a stutter. Mary said yes to an impossible assignment that would cost her everything. None of them were given maps. All of them were given whispers, and each had to choose between the security of the familiar and the risk of the divine. You will too. But that's the nature of the path. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It asks if you're willing. Obedience makes room for the miraculous. When you obey the voice of Spirit, even trembling, you're not just taking a risk. You're creating space. You're clearing away everything that's too small, too shallow, or too false to carry what you've asked for. You're making room for miracles, because the voice never leads you into emptiness without also preparing fullness on the other side. Obedience is the gate through which what you prayed for finally finds you. In chapter 1, we confronted the noise. In chapter 2, we tuned in. In chapter 3, we discerned truth from thought. Now, in chapter 4, you've reached the hinge, the turning point where listening becomes living. This is where transformation gets real, not in the hearing, but in the walking. You don't have to be fearless, just faithful. Let's not pretend this is easy. Choosing obedience may cost you approval. It may feel like free fall. It may look irrational to everyone else. But it's not about being fearless. It's about being faithful. Even trembling steps in the right direction carry divine momentum. Your job isn't to have it all figured out. Your job is to move in the direction of what you heard, even if it's just one small, scared, obedient step. That's all Spirit needs to flood your path with grace. And that leads us to a powerful truth. What if the only thing standing between you and everything you asked for is the obedience you keep postponing? In chapter 5, we'll explore what happens after you act, the synchronicities, confirmations, and subtle winks from the divine that say, yes, you heard me right. But for now, sit with this. The voice is clear. Your heart has heard. The path is open. Will you walk it? Because every step you take in obedience, it is a step back to yourself. Chapter 5. Silence Speaks Back. How the universe confirms what you obey. Obedience always feels like a leap into the unknown. But what if the moment you jump, the universe jumps with you? You followed the whisper. You left the safe, the expected, the logical. Maybe it was a quiet yes in the dark. Perhaps it was a trembling no to what everyone else applauded. Maybe it was a shift so slight no one noticed. But you knew something irreversible had changed. Then, silence. No lightning bolt. No angel choir. Just stillness. But make no mistake, the stillness is not absence. It's an affirmation. Because once you act on what you heard, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The universe speaks back, not always with words, not always with speed, but with signs, alignments, echoes, subtle confirmations that seem too precise to be chance. You're not being tested, you're being mirrored. Obedience activates the field. Think back to Chapter 3, where we explored how the heart hears before the mind understands. In Chapter 4, we dared to act on that heart knowing. Now, something mystical begins to happen. Your action becomes a signal, a new frequency sent into the field of reality, and the field responds. Quantum physicists might describe this as the observer effect, the idea that consciousness influences outcomes. Mystics might call it divine orchestration. Believers might say, God made a way. Whatever language you use, the principle is the same. When your internal frequency shifts, the external world begins to match it. Synchronicity, the universe's wink. Carl Jung defined synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence. Not just randomness, but divine choreography. You think of someone, and they text you. You read a line in a book that answers a question you never voiced. You walk away from something draining, and an opportunity that feels like home appears. These are not flukes. They are feedback loops. They are the language of a listening universe. One that responds, not to your words alone, but to your alignment. The whisper you followed is being echoed back to you. And each echo is a wink that says, I see you. Keep going. Confirmation rarely comes before the leap. This is the part many struggle with. We want confirmation before we move, a sign, a vision, a certainty. But the system isn't built that way. Faith comes first. Obedience opens the channel. Confirmation follows. You don't get the echo until you speak. You don't get the wave until you step. Moses had to raise his staff before the sea parted. Abraham had to climb the mountain before the ram appeared. You must act from the whisper, not wait for proof of it. The universe rewards resonance, not hesitation. When you stop chasing, it starts arriving. Obedience has a side effect few talk about. It removes static from your field. All that striving, doubting, begging energy dissolves. You stop pushing against life and start moving with it. And when you do, things find you faster. Not because you forced them, but because your signal is clean. As Joseph Murphy often said, your subconscious mind is like a garden. It grows whatever you plant with emotion. And when your action reflects belief, the subconscious gets the message. This is who we are now. So the soil adjusts, the pattern reforms, the mirror changes. How to recognize the echoes. Sometimes we miss the signs because we're still looking for fire from the sky. But the universe is poetic. It rarely shouts. It nudges. It reflects. It rhymes. Pay attention to sudden clarity that wasn't there before. Repeated messages from different sources. Dreams that feel alive with meaning. Encounters that seem too perfect to be planned. A deepening sense of peace, even when logic says you should be panicking. These are not flukes. They are feedback. They are your whisper, coming back to you in new form. When it feels like nothing's happening. Sometimes the echo is subtle. Sometimes it takes time. You obeyed. You listened. You moved. But now, it feels like silence again. Here's what you need to remember. The seed doesn't sprout the moment it's planted. The echo doesn't arrive the moment you speak. This is not punishment. This is a pattern. In the law of the seed, the buried stage was necessary. Likewise, after obedience, there is a period of quiet calibration. You're not being ignored. You're being aligned. The silence isn't a no. It's the soil preparing to bloom. The whisper was real. So is the response. Let's return to the sequence. You tuned in. You heard. You acted. Now the divine meets you where you are. Not to reward performance, but to affirm resonance. You are not being asked to prove yourself. You are being reminded. You are already in dialogue with the infinite. You are already part of the unfolding. And the voice that led you out will lead you in. In Chapter 6, we'll explore the often confusing space between impulse and intuition, longing and leading, and how to know the difference. But for now, take comfort in this. You were not imagining it. You were not wrong to follow it. You are not alone in this. Heaven heard you, and now it speaks back. In 1,000 small sacred ways. Just listen. Chapter 6. Discernment and Desire. Knowing what's you and what's God. Sometimes the voice is clear. Sometimes it isn't. You've obeyed the whisper. You've felt the echo. But now, a new question arises. One that haunts even the most devoted listener. Was that really God? Or was that just me? It's the ache of the sincere seeker, the desire to get it right, to not confuse ego for intuition, to not follow fear, thinking it's faith, to not build castles in the sky and call it prophecy. Discernment is not about doubt. It's about refining. It's how we learn to tell the difference between impulse and instruction, between emotional noise and spiritual signal. And here's the truth. Desire is not the enemy of discernment, but it must be sanctified. The line between longing and leading. Many people have desires, but not every desire is a divine direction. The line between what you want and what you're called to can be thin and often blurred by emotion, history, or ego. And yet, desire itself is not sinful. Desire is the soul's compass, but only when it's calibrated. In Chapter 5, we explored how the universe responds to alignment. Now we examine the source of that alignment. If you align with a fear-driven goal, the field will still respond, but it will mirror your misalignment. If you're chasing validation, it might work, but it won't fulfill. The destination may only amplify your fragmentation if you're moving from wounding. Discernment asks, Is this voice leading me toward wholeness or another performance? What is discernment, really? Discernment is not spiritual paranoia. It is not second-guessing your every thought. It is inner clarity born from spiritual intimacy. You know the voice better when you know the source, not just through scripture, but through silence. Not just through doctrine, but through deep listening. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice." He didn't say they memorize the rules. He said they recognize the sound. Why? Because they've heard it before. Because they're familiar with its tone. Because they've been in a relationship with it, not just religion. Discernment is not a formula. It's a friendship. Clarity comes from cleansing the channel. Have you noticed? You hear God best when you're not cluttered, when your nervous system is calm, when your mind is not racing, when you're not trying to force a sign. Because clarity doesn't scream. It emerges like light rising in a fog. As Joseph Murphy often taught, your subconscious accepts what you impress with emotion. But if you impress it with confusion, anxiety, or obsession, it doesn't produce miracles. It mirrors chaos. To discern clearly, you must become quiet inside, not because silence creates the voice, but because silence reveals it. How to tell the difference between ego and spirit. There are signs, not rigid rules, but patterns. Ego spirit, urgency, peaceful clarity, fear-based motivation, faith-based pull, outcome obsessed, process trusting, loud, anxious energy, gentle, knowing nudge, self-preserving, soul-expanding. The ego often wants what feels big, fast, or impressive. Spirit often whispers what feels humble, quiet, or hidden. And yet, the whisper carries weight. It doesn't scream, but it stays. It doesn't manipulate, but it moves you. It doesn't need proof, but it produces peace. Discernment is not about choosing what's easy. It's about choosing what's true. The role of desire, a tool, not a master. Desire, in its raw form, can mislead. But sanctified desire, the kind that's passed through fire, prayer, and time, becomes revelation. In Neville Goddard's terms, desire is proof of potential. You could not desire it unless it already existed in the field of your possibility. But Neville also warns, you must assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not chase it like a ghost. To do that, you must know the nature of what you're desiring. Does it lead you into wholeness? Does it deepen your integrity? Does it reflect the whisper you've been hearing all along? If so, that desire is not a distraction. It's a direction. When the voice sounds like you. One of the final stages of discernment is this paradox. The more in tune you are with spirit, the more it will begin to sound like you. Not because you've become God, but because the veil between you and God is thinning. You stop hearing the voice as something outside of you and begin recognizing it as the deepest, most genuine part of your being, your soul in communion with the infinite. This is not delusion. It is a union. And at that point, the question shifts from, Was that me or God? 2. Am I living in alignment with my highest knowing? Because when you are, the answer is yes. In Chapter 7, we'll explore what happens when you're sure you've heard, you've acted in obedience, and yet nothing seems to change. We'll look at spiritual delay not as punishment, but preparation. But for now, remember, discernment is not about paranoia. It's about peace. And peace is the echo of alignment. The whisper is still speaking, and you're closer than you think. Chapter 7. The wait is not wasted. Time as a teacher, not a test. You heard the whisper. You obeyed. You even discerned that it wasn't just your desire. It was divine. And yet, nothing has changed. No breakthrough. No confirmation. No clear result. Just more waiting. This is where the journey gets uncomfortable. Not because you've done something wrong, but because now you're walking by faith, without fireworks. The whisper came alive in Chapter 2. You followed it through action in Chapter 4. You felt the confirmation in Chapter 5. You've discerned the voice from ego in Chapter 6. Now comes the crucible of delay, not as punishment, but as purification. Time doesn't test you. It trains you. We've been conditioned to fear waiting, to believe that delay means denial, that if something isn't happening now, it won't happen at all. But the truth is far more sacred. Time is not your enemy. Time is your midwife. It is not testing if you're worthy. It's aligning you with what's already on the way. The delay isn't there to break your faith. It's there to stretch it into something unshakable. You are not standing still. You are becoming. Faith in the waiting room. This in-between space, after obedience, before result, is where genuine faith breathes. Not loud, confident faith, but quiet, persevering faith. The kind that says, even if I don't see it yet, I still know. The kind that doesn't perform to get noticed. The kind that trusts because of who whispered, not what was promised. As the prophet Habakkuk wrote, though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. The paradox, it will feel like delay. But divine delay is not a calendar issue. It's a character formation. Why results don't come immediately. If everything manifested the moment you believed, you'd never learn depth. You'd never develop discernment. You'd mistake manifestation for magic, not maturity. Waiting isn't passive. It's active alignment. It's a process where your motives are refined. Your ego gets quiet. Your identity shifts to match what you're asking for. You think you're waiting for it to arrive, but often it's waiting for you to transform. The whisper you obeyed in Chapter 2 was real. But sometimes it takes time to become the version of you who can hold the fulfillment of that whisper. God is not slow. You are being calibrated. We tend to confuse slowness with absence, but divine timing isn't slow. It's exact. Like a seed in winter, what looks dead is often in deep preparation. You may not feel progress, but something is shifting. The people meant to find you are moving into position. The version of you required to sustain the next season is maturing. The inner blueprint aligns with the external conditions. In Chapter 1, we said that true hearing begins in stillness. Now we discover that becoming happens in that same stillness. The wait reveals what you really believe. Waiting strips away illusion. When things don't happen fast, your surface-level affirmations begin to unravel. What's underneath is revealed. Do I trust the voice or just the outcome? Am I devoted to the whisper or addicted to speed? Do I only obey when there's a visible reward? This isn't to shame you, it's to free you. Because once your faith is no longer dependent on circumstances, you're unstoppable. The wait detoxes your need to control. It untangles you from the timeline and returns you to trust. This is not dead space. This is sacred recalibration. Signs you're still on the right path. You might not see fireworks, but look for the quiet signs. A more profound sense of inner stillness, even without answers. A growing clarity about what matters and what doesn't. People or patterns gently falling away that no longer serve you. A subtle shift in your emotional baseline. From striving to surrender. These are not delays. They are preparations. As Neville Goddard once said, all transformation begins with an intense burning desire. But the flame must be tempered, not rushed. The burn makes you pure. The wait makes you ready. You haven't missed it. You're becoming it. Maybe you've wondered, did I miss my moment? But timing in the spiritual realm doesn't work like clockwork. It works like alignment. You didn't miss the moment. You are moving toward it, and it is moving toward you. Remember, the whisper doesn't expire. The delay doesn't disqualify. The wait doesn't waste you. It works you. And when the time comes, it often feels sudden. But you'll know it wasn't sudden. It was faithful. In the final chapter, we'll explore what it means to move beyond moments of divine guidance into a lifestyle of spiritual sensitivity. But for now, trust this. If you're in the waiting, you're in the womb of what's coming. The silence is not punishment. It's the deep breath before the miracle. Keep becoming. It's closer than it feels. Chapter 8. When the whisper becomes a way. Living in communion, not just communication. The whisper began as a moment, a sacred flash, a divine tug, a quiet knowing. But now something's shifted. You no longer wait to hear it. You begin to live from it. This is not the same as getting another sign. This does not need a new confirmation. This is the holy transition. From occasionally listening to constantly communing. The whisper is no longer just a voice. It is a rhythm you move to. It's a presence that walks with you, not in front, not behind, but within. Beyond the burning bush. Many seek burning bushes, dramatic signs, moments of glory, goosebumps in worship. But the mature soul eventually realizes the bush may burn once, but the voice continues. In the ordinary, you no longer need fireworks to believe, no longer crave drama to feel divine. You realize that the whisper never left. You just stopped running from the silence. What began in chapter 1 as stillness? What deepened in chapter 2 as obedience? What was refined through delay and discernment now becomes your default state. You're no longer chasing encounters. You are the encounter. Living from union, not need. To live in communion means you've stopped bargaining with the divine. You don't pray to get things. You pray to stay aligned. You don't listen for signs out of fear. You listen because love tunes your ears. The voice of God no longer feels distant. It sounds like the part of you that's always calm, always steady, always rooted in truth. You don't panic your way into answers. You present your way into awareness. There's no more separation between spiritual moments and the rest of life. Your walk, your work, your words, all of it hums with the sacred. You become the whisper for others. The more you live from communion, the more others feel something shift in your presence, even if they don't know what it is. You no longer have to say, "God told me." You embody the frequency of someone who listens. Your peace becomes contagious. Your actions begin to align without force. Your timing starts to feel miraculous, but it's really just natural when you're in sync with Source. People ask how you know when to move, when to wait, when to speak. And the answer is simple, though not always explainable. Because I heard it in the silence. Faith no longer feels like trying. This is the great exhale. You stop trying to believe. You start believing. It's not about mustering faith anymore. It's about dwelling in it, like a home you've built with God. You know now, the whisper isn't rare. The silence isn't empty. The waiting wasn't wasted. The journey wasn't random. Everything had a purpose. Everything was part of the training. Everything led to this moment, where listening is no longer an event. It's a lifestyle. From guidance to groundedness. When you were new to the whisper, you needed step-by-step guidance. Now, you move from an anchored instinct. You don't flinch when things are delayed. You don't spiral when the plan shifts, because the source never changes. And you've made your home in that steadiness. Jesus meant this when he said, "The kingdom is within you." Not a place to arrive at, a presence to remember. The whisper was never separate. The ultimate revelation, the voice you've been hearing all along, wasn't something outside of you trying to get in. It was the deepest, most genuine part of you. The part untouched by trauma, unmoved by fear, unshaken by the world's noise. It was God in you, the divine, in dialogue with itself through you. Not a visitor, a resident. And now, the communion is constant. Mirror turn, returning you to you. So here we are, not at the end, but at the beginning of a new relationship with life itself. You no longer live wondering if you're doing it right. You live from awareness. You live from stillness. You live from the whisper that became a way. And when you forget, as we all do, you now know where to return. Not to effort, not to striving, not to panic, but to presence, to the calm within the storm, to the knowing beyond explanation, to the voice that never left, only waited to be heard. The whisper lives in you. Let it lead. You've listened long enough to know now. The voice you were chasing was never far. It didn't come in thunder. It didn't beg to be believed. It waited in silence until you stopped filling the space. The whisper was never a sound. It was a signal, a frequency that matched your soul before you had words for faith. Every moment of doubt was really an invitation. Every pause in clarity was a deeper attunement. Every delay, a divine echo asking, "Will you still believe when it's quiet?" Now you know, stillness was never empty. It was sacred. And the silence wasn't the absence of God. It was the presence of everything true. You are no longer the seeker. You are the sanctuary. No more noise, no more chasing. Just this, a soul tuned to its source. A life lived as the answer. A heart that doesn't need to scream to be heard. Because it has finally said yes. Yes to the whisper. Yes to the way. Yes to what was always waiting for you to remember. He who has ears now hears.